Hello friends, welcome to the HFY Ode, where we bring you new science fiction stories, a new world, a new adventure. And yes, there is no robotic or AI voices here, only real human voices with real human touch. So let's start this journey, and please subscribe my channel if you like the stories and press the bell icon for the latest updates. Let's have a story. Okay.
I have killed things in 17 systems. I tell you this not to boast. I tell you so that you understand exactly who is speaking when I say I had never once been afraid of soft-skinned creatures. Not in 40 seasons. Not in 17 systems. Not until the canyon they called the throat. Not until them. My name in the shape your translators will manage is Oran. I served the lattice for most of my life, and the lattice does one thing better than any force in the cluster. We do not make war. War is for the loud and the desperate, for commanders who have run out of cleverness and have nothing left but numbers and noise. The lattice makes ambushes, and an ambush done correctly is not a fight at all. It is a sentence written before the enemy ever arrives. The enemy walks into the middle of it and only gets to read the final word. I wrote sentences like that for 40 seasons. I never once lost. So when the warden gave me the canyon, I will tell you the truth. I almost felt sorry for what was coming up that road. Almost. Let me start with the world, because the world mattered more than I understood at the time. And because if I let myself go quiet for even a moment, I am standing in it again. The world had no name worth learning. The humans called it Harrow. Maybe one of them named it that once in some bad hour, and the others repeated it the way frightened creatures repeat any small comfort until it becomes a fact. It was a dust world, red and gray and unspeakably old. The kind of place a star forgets it ever made and lets spin on out of habit. There was no soft thing anywhere on its surface. No water you could drink without a machine to clean it. No green. Just stone that had been broken and broken again, until even the rubble was tired. And the wind. I have to make you understand the wind, because we lived inside it for 6 days and I think it got into me and never fully left. It came down off the high plateaus in long, dry breaths, never stopping, never gusting, just an endless patient exhale that carried grit so fine it found every seam in our armor, every joint, every breathing filter. By the second day on Harrow, you tasted iron whether you had bled or not. By the fourth you stopped noticing it, which was worse, because then it was simply the taste of being alive. The wind made a sound against the canyon walls that I can still hear. Not a howl. A kind of low, dry singing, very far away, as though the dead builders of that place had left something behind that mourned them. I am telling you about the wind because I want you to know it was beautiful, in its way, and terrible and completely indifferent to all of us. It did not care which side won. It would carry the iron taste of our blood and theirs without preference. I had not thought about that before the canyon. After, I thought about little else. The canyon split the only road for 900 kilometers in any direction. That was the whole reason it mattered. Harrow was crossed by exactly one usable route through that region, an old road cut by some civilization dead long before either of our species came scratching at this part of the cluster, and the road ran through the canyon because there was nowhere else for it to run. The plateau walls climbed straight up on both sides, sheer and broken, the deep dried blood red of old iron. At the bottom, the road, narrow, cracked, faithful, and at the center of the canyon, the walls leaned in toward each other, closer and closer, until the sky overhead became nothing but a crooked pale ribbon of light far, far above, and the road below ran for 2 full kilometers through a corridor barely 30 meters wide. That was the part the humans had named the throat, a 2-kilometer stretch where the canyon swallowed the road, where anything moving along it could be seen along its entire length from above and could see almost nothing of what waited in the rocks. A place where the high ground was not just an advantage. It was everything. It was the difference between a hunter and a corpse. I have built ambushes my whole life. I had never in my life been handed a gift like the throat. Let's understand how a true ambush is made. because if you do not understand the craft, you will think what happened to us was bad luck, and it was not bad luck. And the lie that it was bad luck is the lie I have spent the rest of my life refusing to tell. An ambush is not made in the instant the trap closes. Anyone can spring a trap. An ambush is made in the long, patient, boring days before, when nothing happens at all, when discipline is the only weapon that matters. The lattice teaches that the soldier who can lie still in the rock for 6 days without complaint is worth 10 who can shoot. I believed that. I had been that soldier once, before I was the one who placed them. We had 6 days. The warden's larger plan had given us that much warning, and 6 days is a long time to learn a piece of ground better than its own dead builders ever knew it. I placed 210 soldiers of the lattice into those walls. Not in a line. A line is what the desperate do, what amateurs do, a single row of guns that the enemy can find and break in one place and pour through. I placed my soldiers in depth. 3 overlapping arcs along the length of the throat, arranged so that any creature surviving the killing reach of the first arc would walk directly into the second, and any creature surviving the second would die in the third with something like relief in its eyes, grateful at last for the ending. Each arc covered the others. There was no angle on that road, no slab, no shadow, no scrap of cover that was not watched by at least 3 positions that could not see each other and so could not all be silenced at once. I had checked this. I had walked every meter of it. The heavy lances went high, into the cliff hollows where the depth of the rock would mask their heat from any scan. The close killers, and I will have to tell you more about them later, because they are the center of this grief, went low, down among the fallen slabs along the road itself, close enough to reach out and touch what they killed. The mid-arc filled the space between. And along the canyon floor my burrowers worked for 2 full nights, seeding sensor baffles into the stone, dampers that drank heat and motion and sound, so that to any approaching eye the throat would read as exactly what it appeared to be. 2 kilometers of empty, ancient, indifferent rock. I tested it the way I always test a thing, which is by trying to defeat it myself. In the cold before each dawn I went down onto the road alone. I lay on the stone where I imagined the enemy commander would walk, and I looked up at the walls knowing where every one of my 210 soldiers was hidden, having placed each of them with my own judgment, and I could not find them. I want that to land, I knew, and I could not find them. There was no glint, no shadow out of place, no warmth bleeding from the rock, no sound under the singing of the wind. There were only the walls, red and broken and patient, and the long clean run of the road, and the crooked ribbon of sky. It was the finest thing I had ever built. I knew it then. I did not yet know it would be the last. Warden Sethick came on the 5th day to inspect. You should know something about the warden, because in the end I think he understood before I did that something was wrong with the whole shape of what we believed. Sethick was old, older than me, which on Harrow meant very old indeed, with the gray fully into his crest, the mark of a Thren who has survived long enough to stop expecting to. He had fought in the bad seasons, the ones we did not talk about, the campaigns where the lattice had learned its lessons in blood instead of in books. He did not praise. In all the time I served under him, I never once heard him tell a soldier they had done well, because he believed that a soldier who needed to be told had already failed. He walked the length of the throat slowly that 5th day, with his hands clasped behind him and his head turning, taking in the walls, the angles, the arcs he could not see but could feel were there. The wind sang its far-off song. The grit hissed against his armor. He stopped at the narrowest point where the walls leaned closest and the road was at its most naked, and he stood there for a long time, turning a slow full circle. Then he said, without looking at me, "It is finished before it begins." That was the highest thing the warden had ever said to anyone in my hearing. I carried it for the rest of the day like a warm stone in the cold. Before he left he said one more thing, and I have turned it over so many times since that the words have worn smooth. He was looking down the road north, toward where the enemy would come. He said, "You have studied them." It was not a question, but I answered it as one. I told him yes. I told him I had read everything the lattice had collected on the humans, their physiology, their formations, their habits. I told him what we knew, the long, careful list of facts that I will give you in a moment, because every single one of them was true, and every single one of them killed my soldiers. Sethek listened, and at the end he said, "We know what they do. Do we know what they are?" I did not understand the question. I told him a thing is what it does. That is doctrine. That is the foundation under everything the lattice teaches. You do not need to know the soul of the enemy. You need to know the enemy's behavior, because behavior is all an ambush ever touches. The trap does not care what the prey dreams about. It only cares which way the prey runs. The warden looked at me for a moment longer. Then he made the small gesture that meant the conversation was over, and he went back up out of the canyon, and I did not see him again until much later, in a place I will tell you about when I have the strength. I thought he was getting old. I thought the question was the question of a tired mind reaching for meaning where there was only mechanism. I was so certain. That is the thing about certainty, you cannot feel it failing. It feels exactly the same as being right, all the way up until the road catches fire. Here is what we knew about the humans, every word of it true. We knew they were creatures of the light. Their eyes were weak in the dark, weaker than ours by a wide margin, and across every record we had they preferred to move and fight and work by day. They slept when their suns went down. They huddled. Their kind had come up out of bright open places and never fully trusted the dark. So I expected them in the morning, when the heat had not yet built and the haulers would run cool, and that expectation was reasonable, and it was correct, and it was a small piece of the larger correctness that ruined us. We knew their numbers. Our watchers far to the north had counted the column when it set out from the human staging point. 11 haulers heavy with cargo, and an escort of at most 40, likely fewer. We knew the forward base they were resupplying was thin and badly placed and could not last 2 more weeks without what those haulers carried. We knew, therefore, that the column had to come, and had to come down this road, because we had spent a full season strangling every other route until this one was the only door left open in a burning house, left open on purpose, so the thing inside would run exactly where we wanted. We knew their machines. The haulers were ugly squat things, armored at the front and soft at the back, the build of a creature that has chosen to carry rather than to fight. The 2 light scout craft that ran with such columns were fast and fragile, good eyes, no teeth. We knew their doctrine, or believed we did. Humans, when ambushed, did what most living things do. They sought cover, they returned fire toward the threat, they tried to break contact and withdraw the way they had come. Predictable, survivable for us, because every one of those responses was something I had built the throat to punish. Seek cover, and the cover was registered by 3 of my positions. Return fire upward, and they would be firing blind at rock that hid nothing they could hurt before the lances answered. Withdraw, and the walls of molten stone would already have sealed the road behind them. Every fact was true. I am going to say that a third time because it is the whole bitter heart of this story, and I need you to feel the weight of it. Every fact we had about the humans was true. We had not been lazy. We had not been arrogant in our research, only in our conclusions. The wound was not in what we knew. The wound was in believing that knowing what a creature does is the same as knowing what it will choose to become in the one moment that decides everything. The warden had asked me, "Do we know what they are?" And I had told him a thing is what it does. I was wrong about that. It is the only thing I have ever been certain I was wrong about, and I am certain of it the way I used to be certain of everything else. They came on the 6th day, in the last light. I almost missed the moment because I was watching for the morning. The suns were already low when my forward watcher signaled movement, north mouth of the canyon coming in slow. I felt the first cold flicker of something then, not fear yet, just the small wrongness of a creature behaving against its own nature. Why the dusk? Why move in the failing light when their weak eyes would soon be all but blind? I told myself the answer that comforted me, which was that they were desperate and behind schedule and pushing through fatigue to reach the base. It was a good answer. It was probably even partly true. It just was not the whole answer, and on Harrow the whole answer was the only one that mattered. I went up to the high hollow myself, the one with the clearest line down the full length of the road, and I lay in the cold rocked the way I had lain 1,000 times in 17 systems, and I watched them come. The first thing I felt was disappointment. There were so few of them. I counted the haulers. 11, exactly as the watchers had said, though one ran rough listing, trailing a thin smear of smoke, wounded somewhere on the long road south. The haulers were exactly what we had expected, squat, armored forward, soft behind, grinding along on heavy tracks that threw up curtains of red dust and dragged a low, ugly engine note through the stone that I could feel in my chest from 600 meters above. And around them the escort. I counted twice, because I did not believe the first count. 14. 14 humans. Not 40. Not even half of 40. 4 of them rode in the 2 light scout craft, fast open things that darted ahead and fell back and ranged along the column like nervous insects. The other 10 walked. They walked beside the haulers with their weapons held low and their heads turning slow, unhurried, and they did not look like much at all. They were small, every human is small to us, but these looked worn small, ground down, their armor scuffed pale and colorless by the dust. One of them, near the middle of the column, walked with a limp on the left side, favoring it, and that limping one I noticed because it moved like a thing that should have been carried and had refused to be. 14 of them, 210 of us, in a perfect trap with the high ground, the surprise, the angles, the silence, the time. I will be honest, since there is no use being anything else now. I almost called the warden. I almost asked whether we should simply let them pass and take them with a smaller element further down the road and save the canyon for a worthier enemy. The blade I had spent 6 days sharpening was meant for an army, and to bring it down on 14 exhausted creatures felt like dropping a mountain to crush a single seed. There is a kind of vanity in a craftsman that does not want to waste his finest work on something small. I felt it. I want you to know I felt it, because it means that even at the end, even in my pride, some part of me sensed there was nothing here worth 210 lives, and could not have told you why. I did not call him. Doctrine is doctrine. The trap was set. The enemy was in the road. You do not unmake a perfect thing because you pity the prey. So I gave the soldiers of the lattice the signal to hold and ready, and I watched, and I waited. The column came down into the wide part of the canyon first, where the walls still leaned back and the dying light still reached the floor. They moved well. I will grant them that, better than tired creatures should. The 2 scout craft pushed ahead and swept the road, hovering low, sensors reaching out into the rock. They found nothing. My burrowers had done their work and the throat red as empty stone. The craft drifted back to the column, satisfied, and the whole formation pressed on toward the narrows, toward the place where the walls would close over them like a hand. And then one of them stopped. A single human, one of the 10 on foot, the limping one near the middle beside the 3rd hauler. It stopped, and the column did not, so for a moment it stood alone in the road while the haulers ground on past it through the dust. And it looked up. It looked at the walls. Not in fear. I had seen fear in 1,000 species across 17 systems, and this was not it. Fear is a fast thing, a flinching thing, a thing that wants to be somewhere else. This was the opposite. The human went very still and tilted its head, the way you tilt your head toward a sound you cannot quite place, and it looked up at the cliffs with a kind of slow attention that made the cold go further into me than the wind ever had, because through 600 meters of cold air and solid stone, with 210 of my soldiers hidden where their own commander could not find them, I felt, with absolute certainty, that the limping creature in the road was looking directly at me. It could not have been, I have told you, there was nothing to see. I had lain on that road myself and failed to find my own people. There was no glint, no warmth, no shadow, no sound under the singing of the wind. The human could not have seen me or any of us. I knew it. I know it still. But it stood there in the failing light, and it looked up at the exact place where death was waiting, and then it raised one hand to the side of its head and spoke into its communications. Calm, brief, unhurried. And every other human in that column changed. I need to describe this carefully, because it is the moment the ground moved under everything I believed, and I have gone back to it more times than I have gone back to my own name. They did not stop. They did not raise their weapons high or shout or run or freeze or do any of the loud panic things I had spent 40 seasons learning to count on. They did something far quieter and far worse. They shifted. The way a single living animal shifts when it senses a predator and decides in the same breath not to let the predator know it has been sensed. The haulers did not change their pace by a hair. The walking humans did not break their stride, but the spacing between them opened, just slightly, just enough that a single burst of fire could no longer take two of them at once. The two scout craft drifted out from the front of the column to its flanks, no longer scouting ahead but watching the walls. And the weapons that had been carried low came up, slow, almost lazy, to the ready, held now in the way. A thing is held when it is about to be used, but done so gently, so casually, that to any watcher who did not already know better it would have looked like nothing at all. Like tired soldiers merely tired of carrying their guns pointed down. It took perhaps 8 seconds. If you had blinked, you would have missed all of it. I did not blink. I have never in my life watched anything as closely as I watched those 14 worn-down creatures rearrange themselves, without a word I could hear and without a single wasted motion, into something I suddenly and completely did not understand. They knew. They could not have known. There was no signature to find. There was no sound to hear. There was nothing in that canyon but stone and dust and the long blue shadows of the dying day. But one tired creature had stopped in the road and looked up, and somehow it had known, and now all 14 of them were walking down into the throat like soldiers who had already decided they would die in it, and had decided, in the same calm breath, exactly how much they intended to charge us for the privilege. That was the moment to spring the trap. I have told you I look for the place where I went wrong, and this is the first one, the truest one. Right then, in those 8 seconds, while they were still moving, still rearranging, still not yet set, I should have given the signal. The kill box was complete. They were inside it. Even half ready, even surprised, 14 creatures against 210 in a perfect trap would have died. Most of them, maybe all. I did not. I waited because the deepest law of the ambush, the one Sethek himself had carved into me when my crest was still dark, is that you let the enemy commit. You let them walk all the way in. You let the last of them pass the last of your positions, so that when the trap closes there is no one left outside it, no one to flee back up the road, no one to break free, no one to carry the warning home. A perfect ambush kills every single thing that enters it, or it is not perfect, only lucky. I had spent 6 days making a perfect thing and not a lucky one. I would not spoil it for 8 seconds of nerves. So I let them come. I let the wounded column grind down into the narrows, into the part where the walls leaned in and the road ran straight and exposed, and the sky shrank to a thread. I watched the lead hauler pass beneath the first arc of my hidden lances, the second arc. I watched the walking humans pass beneath the close killers tucked low behind the fallen slabs, so near that one of my soldiers could have reached out and laid a hand on the limping one's shoulder. I watched the rear scout craft drift past the final position, the last of them, all 14 now sealed inside 2 kilometers of leaning stone, with 210 of the finest killers in the cluster, arranged above and around and below them in 3 overlapping arcs from which there is no surviving. It was, I promise you on whatever you will let me swear by, flawless. I have taken it apart 1,000 times in the dark and I cannot find the flaw. There was no flaw in the trap. The flaw, if there was one, was older than the trap and deeper, and it was in the sentence the warden had spoken to me on the 5th day, the one I had brushed aside. We know what they do. Do we know what they are? We did not. In the last moment before I gave the signal, the limping human looked up one final time, right at the high hollow, right at me, and it did a thing with its mouth, a pulling back of the soft tissue from the teeth. I did not know yet what the expression meant. I learned later that the humans use it for many things, and that one of those things, the oldest of them, the one that goes back to before they ever crawled up out of their bright open places, is the thing a predator does when the prey has walked the wrong way down the wrong road, and there is no longer any need to hide what is about to happen. That is what it meant. Then I gave the signal, and the throat became fire. But here is what is supposed to happen. When the signal goes, the high lances fire first, all of them in a single coordinated breath, aimed not at the enemy but at the road in front of and behind the column, to throw up walls of molten stone and white flame and turn the open road into a sealed cage. In that first instant, the enemy loses the one thing that might have saved it, the freedom to move. Then the mid-arc fires down into the trapped, blinded, deafened column. Then the close killers rise out of the slabs and finish, at arm's reach, whatever the fire has left living. From signal to silence against a column this small, the whole sentence should be spoken in under a minute. I had timed it. I had timed everything. I always do. The high lances fired. That part worked. The road erupted at both ends of the column, a wall of liquid rock and roaring white fire that climbed the canyon walls, and through heat I could feel 600 meters up. The throat lit the deep orange of a forge. The dusk caught the light and held it, and for one heartbeat the whole narrow corridor glowed like the inside of something burning, and it was exactly the thing I had built. The column was caged. The road was sealed at both ends. The trap had closed without a single error. And then nothing else happened the way it was meant to. The humans were already gone. Not fled, there was nowhere to flee. Gone the way water is gone the instant it finds the crack you did not know was in the bottom of the cup. In the half-second between my signal and the lances answering, in less time than it takes to think the word now, the 14 of them had thrown themselves not down the road, which was death, and not back up it, which was death, but sideways. Into the rock, into the fallen slabs, into the broken ground at the base of the walls, into the exact cover where my close killers were hidden. I had chosen the low positions for my soldiers with my own judgment. I had picked the slabs and the hollows and the broken ground because they were the best concealment in the canyon, the best cover, the best protection from fire falling from above. I had chosen well. I had chosen so well that when the trap closed, the humans running blind into chaos, with the world on fire at both ends and the air thick enough to drink, chose the same cover, for the same reasons in the same half-second, by an instinct I had no name for and still do not. And so when the mid-arc of my lances fired down into the caged column, it fired into 11 abandoned haulers and a road full of nothing. The killing storm that should have torn 14 humans into the wind instead splashed and screamed across empty stone, while the humans themselves were already pressed into the rocks beside my own close killers. Close enough to touch. I heard the first of it on the open channel before my mind would let me understand what I was hearing. One of the low positions, a close killer, transmitting, not a report, not a command, just a sound. A short, high, broken sound I had never once heard a soldier of the lattice make in 40 seasons of war. And then it stopped. Then another. Then the channel filled with them, and I lay in my high hollow with the firelight on my face, and finally understood that the perfect thing I had built had closed its jaws on nothing, and that down in the dark and the dust and the roaring orange light, 14 tired creatures had landed in the laps of my finest killers, and had not panicked, and had not frozen, and had begun, quietly, methodically, at arm's length, in a language of motion older than either of our species, to take us apart. You must understand what a close killer of the lattice is. They are the finest we have at the oldest and most intimate work there is, the ending of a life within reach of your own. They are chosen for it, shaped for it, perfected for it across a lifetime. I had placed 40 of them in the low positions, the most lethal soldiers of the most lethal force in the cluster. And now they were dying, and they were dying fast, and they were dying to 14 creatures who, 11 seconds earlier, had been limping down a road too tired to lift their guns. We had come to deliver a slaughter. That was the thing we had not questioned. We thought the slaughter belonged to us. We had built a beautiful machine to deliver it, and we were so proud of the machine that we had forgotten the only truth that has ever mattered in this work, the truth I had known since my crest was dark and had somehow, in all my certainty, stopped believing. A trap only works on a thing that behaves the way you predicted. The humans did not behave the way we predicted. They never had. We had simply never before been close enough to find out, and by the time we were close enough to touch, it was already far too late to learn the lesson and live. I lay in my high hollow and watched the canyon I had built come apart beneath me, and the wind came down off the plateau the way it always had, dry and singing and full of iron, carrying the taste of lattice blood up the walls without preference or pity. And far below in the firelight and the churning dust, I saw a small limping shape rise up from behind a fallen slab with something terrible held ready in its hands. It turned. It looked up the wall, toward the high positions, toward the lances, toward me. And it began to climb. That was the moment I stopped being a hunter. I will tell you what came after. But you should know now, before I do, that of the 210 soldiers of the lattice I led down into that canyon, I am the only reason this story has ever been told at all. Because I am the only one who walked out of it. And I walked out running. She came down the ridge slowly, and I stood and let her come. I want to describe her as she was in that moment, because the records will tell you the humans are monsters, and the young soldiers I speak to now look at me with a kind of patient pity when I try to say otherwise. And somewhere there is probably a lattice instructor teaching a room full of dark-crested children that the things which came up that wall were demons out of the old fear stories. They were not. That is the part no one wants. A demon you can build a trap for. A demon behaves like a demon, and a thing that behaves predictably can be killed predictably. The horror of the humans is precisely that they are not monsters. They are small and soft and frightened and tired, and they break, and they bleed, and they want to live exactly as much as anything alive has ever wanted to live. And then they decide, against all of that, to climb the wall anyway. She was small. I have said it before, but I need you to hold it against everything else I am about to tell you. She came down off that ridge in the last red light of the burning canyon, and she was barely 2/3 my height, narrow through the shoulders, her pale armor scorched and torn and dark with things I did not want to look at too closely. The bad leg dragged. Every step cost her something I could see her paying. There was a wound high on the left side of her that she held one arm against without seeming to know she was doing it. She was, by any measure my body understands, beaten half to death and standing only out of stubbornness. And she had crossed a battlefield and a wall and a plateau in the dark to reach me. I had decided not to run, and I did not run, but I will not pretend I was brave. I was simply done. There is a place past fear that I had never reached in 17 systems and reached that night on the ridge, a kind of flat, clear calm, and in it I understood that I was going to die, and that it was correct that I die, and that the only thing left to decide was whether I would die with the truth said or with it still trapped in me. So I said it, to her, across whatever gulf there was between us, with my translator humming and the wind singing and her face giving me nothing I could read. I told her she had been right. I told her the trap had been flawless and it had not mattered, and that I finally understood why. I told her about the warden's question, what are they, not what do they do, and that I had answered it wrong 6 days ago and right only an hour ago, too late for 209 of my own. I told her I was the last, that I had run not to live but to carry the thing I had learned, and that if she let me carry it, I would spend the rest of my life making the lattice understand, so that no commander as certain as I had been would ever build the throat again and march 200 more into it to learn a thing already known. I do not know how much of it her translator caught. Maybe none, maybe all. She stood and listened, head tilted in that way she had, and when I finished she was quiet for a long time, long enough that the firelight behind the ridge began to dim as the molten walls cooled and the canyon let go of its glow. Then she did the thing with her mouth again, the pulling back from the teeth. But it was not the predator's version this time. I had learned the difference by then, watching her, the way the same shape can mean the end of something or the beginning of it. This was tired. This was almost kind. This was the expression of a creature who has just survived something it had no right to survive and is too emptied out to feel anything about it but the simple animal fact of still breathing. And she lowered the weapon. I have been asked, in the place I am about to tell you about, why I think she spared me. The ones who ask are always certain there must be a reason that fits their picture of the humans, that she was too wounded to finish it, that she wanted a prisoner, that it was some cold calculation. They want the mercy to be a tactic, because a tactic is a thing you do, and a thing you do can be predicted and used and trapped, and they are still, even now, even with my whole testimony in front of them, trying to build a trap. I have thought about it longer than any of them, and I will give you my answer, and you may do with it what you like. I think she spared me for the same reason I had run. I think she understood, standing on that ridge, looking at the last living soldier of the force that had tried to slaughter her people, that a dead witness teaches nothing. That if she killed me, the lattice would find the canyon in a season, count the bodies and call it bad luck, an ambush gone wrong, a fluke, a thing that would not happen again, and that the next one would be built exactly like mine. I think she had already done the same cold arithmetic I had done in my high hollow, and arrived at the same answer from the other side of it, that the most dangerous thing she could send back to my people was not another corpse. It was a survivor who had seen and understood and would not stop saying so. I think she let me live to be a warning, the way you leave one tree standing scorched at the edge of a fire so the next traveler knows what came through here. She was right, of course. She was right about everything that night. I have been the scorched tree for the rest of my life, standing at the edge of the thing that happened, saying to everyone who will listen, it came through here, and it will come through again, and you cannot trap it because it is not a thing that does, it is a thing that decides. Almost no one listens, but she could not have known that, or perhaps she could. Perhaps the humans understand even that about us, that we would rather rebuild a perfect machine than admit there is a kind of enemy no machine can hold. I have stopped being surprised by what the humans understand. The place I keep promising to tell you about is not dramatic. I am sorry for that. I think some part of me has dressed this story up over the years, has given the canyon more fire and the wind more meaning than they truly had, because the alternative is to admit how plain the ending was. They held me for a time, not dull others. A quiet group of humans who came for the wreckage of the column and found me sitting on the ridge where she had left me, having not moved, having nowhere to move to. They were not cruel. I had expected cruelty and braced for it, and it did not come, which unbalanced me more than cruelty would have. They fed me things my body could mostly use. They asked me questions, patiently, through better translators than mine, and they listened to the answers in a way that made me realize my own people had never once listened to me like that, not in 40 seasons, as though what I said might change what they thought, rather than merely confirm it. It was during that time that I learned the names. The limping commander was called Mara Dahl. A lieutenant, not even a senior rank, I gathered, which astonished me, that the thing on the wall had been junior, had been someone with superiors who would judge her, and had climbed anyway. The big one I had seen turn into the close killer's reach was Okonkwo, a sergeant, the one who had actually felt the ambush first and spoken to Dahl, who had given the 8-second order that rearranged the column. There were others. A medic called Vasquez, who I learned had killed 2 of my soldiers with her bare hands in the low rocks, and then, in the same hour, kept 3 of her own wounded alive through the night. A young one named Trent, who had been the limping ones. I do not have the word. The one she was responsible for. The one she had been protecting by leading from the middle of the column instead of the safety of a scout craft. And I learned that I had not been wrong, that the humans bleed. Of the 14 who walked into the throat, 5 did not walk out. 5. Against 209 of mine. The records will tell you the humans turned the ambush into a slaughter, and that word is true, and I have used it myself, and I want you to understand at last what it actually cost the ones who did it. They did not dance through my trap untouched like the demons of the fear stories. They climbed it on broken legs and torn sides, and they died doing it. A third of them. And the 9 who lived carried the 5 who did not back up the canyon and out the north mouth. Because that is another thing the humans decided long ago, in some hard hour before any of them were born, that you do not leave your own in the rock, even when leaving them would be wiser, even when carrying them might cost you the last of your strength on a world that does not care whether you make it. I asked Vasquez, the medic, near the end of my time with them, why they had not simply surrendered when the fire went up. 14 against 210 in a sealed canyon. Surrender is what doctrine says any rational force does. It is what we expected. It is, if I am honest, half of why the trap was built the way it was, to make surrender or death the only choices, and to deny them the first. She looked at me for a while. Then she said the most human thing I have ever heard, and I have carried it next to the warden's question ever since, the 2 of them like stones in opposite hands. She said, "We didn't know we couldn't win." That was all. We didn't know we couldn't win. Not a boast, not bravado. A simple statement of the only advantage they had ever truly had over us, the one no record could measure and no trap could close on. We had known to the decimal that they could not win. We had built 6 days of certainty on it. And they had walked down into our certainty without sharing it, and turned out to be right, not because they were stronger or faster or harder to kill, but because they had never agreed to the math in the first place. You cannot trap a creature with a conclusion it refuses to accept. They released me. I have never fully understood that either, though I have a guess, and my guess is the same as everything else, that a freed witness travels farther than a held one and says more, and is harder to dismiss. A prisoner can be called broken or coerced. A soldier who walked away free and chose to keep telling the truth at the cost of his own standing, that one is harder to silence. So I went home. I crossed back to the lattice, the lone survivor of the throat, and I told them everything I have told you. They did not believe me. Oh, they believed the facts. They believed 209 were dead because they counted the bodies eventually in the Red Canyon under the singing wind. They believed the warden was gone, but they did not believe the thing the bodies were trying to say. They called it bad luck. They called it a flawed deployment, mine, naturally, which I accepted, because it was true that the depth I had built had turned on us, and a commander takes his failures. But when I tried to say the deeper thing, when I tried to give them the warden's question and the medic's answer, when I tried to tell them that the failure was not in the trap, but in the very idea that the humans could be trapped, they grew quiet and patient and looked at me with that pity, and I understood that I had become, to them, exactly what Sethic had become to me on the 5th day. An old soldier reaching for meaning where they could see only mechanism. A broken thing that had survived something it should not have, and could not stop talking about it. They are building new traps now. Better ones, they tell me. They have studied the throat. They have learned from my mistakes the depth, the fire that gave the humans their light, the blind seam beneath the lances. They have corrected all of it. They are very proud of the corrections. They show me the plans sometimes, the young certain ones with their dark crests, and they wait for me to praise the cleverness, the way the warden never praised mine. And I look at the plans, and I see that they have fixed every flaw in the machine and missed the only thing that ever mattered, which is that the machine was never the problem. I tell them so. They write it down, the way you write down the words of an elder you have already stopped hearing, and they go back to their plans. So I have started telling it differently. I have started telling it to you, to the young ones, the new soldiers, the ones whose crests are still dark and whose certainty has not yet had the chance to kill anyone. I tell it to you before the instructors get to you with their fierce stories and their corrected traps. I tell it to you plainly, the way the humans told their questions to me, as though what I say might change what you think. Because there is still time for you. There was still time for me once on the fifth day, when an old soldier asked me a question, and I was too certain to hear it. But this is the thing I most need you to take from me, and then I will give you the end, and let you go. We did not lose at the throat because our trap was flawed. I have told you 100 ways that the trap was not flawed. It was the finest thing I ever built, and I would build it again, and against any army in the cluster it would have worked, and the bodies in it would not have been ours. We lost because we asked the wrong question, and we asked it 6 days before the first shot, and we asked it with such confidence that we never noticed it was the wrong one. We asked, what will they do when the trap closes? And we answered it correctly. Seek cover, return fire, withdraw, every word true. We built a machine to punish every one of those answers, and the machine worked perfectly, and it did not matter at all. Because the real question, the warden's question, the one he died still trying to teach me, was never what will they do. It was what are they? And the answer to that one is not a behavior you can map and punish. The answer is a decision they make fresh every single time in the worst moment of their lives, when every law of survival is screaming at them to break. And they look at the thing that should break them, the perfect trap, the certain death, the 210 waiting in the rock, and they tilt their heads, and they place the sound, and they decide to climb the wall anyway. You cannot trap that. There is no canyon deep enough, no fire bright enough, no silence long enough. You can only fail to provoke it and live, or provoke it and die. And the most dangerous thing in the cluster is a commander certain enough to believe he has built the one trap that will finally hold a creature that has never, in all its small and frightened history, agreed to be held. We thought the ambush was the slaughter. We thought we were bringing it down the road to them. The ambush was flawless. I will say it one last time, because it is the truest sentence I know and the title of every grief I carry. The ambush was flawless. It was only ever pointed the wrong way. The wind on Harrow never stopped. I told you that at the beginning. It came down off the plateaus in one long dry breath, and it carried the iron taste of blood up out of the canyon without preference, without pity, without the slightest interest in which of us had been the hunter when the night began. I think about that wind more than I think about almost anything else, because in the end it was the only thing in that whole canyon that understood the truth from the start. It did not take sides. It did not believe, as we believed, that there are hunters and there are prey, and the difference between them is fixed and knowable, and can be arranged 6 days in advance with 210 soldiers and a perfect trap. The wind knew better. The wind has blown over a great many flawless ambushes, on a great many worlds, and carried away the iron taste of a great many certain commanders who learned, too late in the narrowest part of the canyon, that the road they thought they had baited them. Mara Dahl stood on the ridge that night and lowered her weapon, and the last thing I saw before her people came for me was her turning to go back down toward the canyon, back toward the dead and the dying, hers and mine together, all of us cooling in the same red rock under the same indifferent wind, to carry her 5 out, because she would not leave them even then, even spent, even on a world with no name worth keeping. I never saw her again. I do not know if she is still alive. The humans are short-lived things, and it has been a long time. But I think of her on that ridge, small and broken and unbeaten, every time one of you brings me a new trap and waits for me to call it clever. And I tell you what I should have understood on the road in the cold, 6 days too early to matter, When I lay down where the enemy commander would stand and could not find my own soldiers, and felt the warm glow of my own perfection. They were never the prey. We just kept building beautiful rooms and walking in first, and pulling the door shut behind us, and calling it a trap, right up until the moment the soft and the small and the frightened ones, who had never once agreed to die there, tilted their heads and placed the sound, and turned our flawless thing into the only honest word for what it always was. A slaughter. Ours.